The distress beacon cut through the void like a scream in the darkness, its electromagnetic pulse rippling across star systems in a desperate plea for salvation. The signal originated from the Kepler 442 system, where the peaceful Zephyrian colony of New Haven had thrived for 3 generations. Now, their world burned under an alien siege that had lasted 47 days. Commander Thexani of the Galactic Council Defense Fleet received the transmission aboard his flagship, the Harmony's Edge. The tall, blue-skinned Andromedan studied the holographic display with calculating yellow eyes, his 4 arms moving with practiced efficiency across the command console. The distress call painted a grim picture. An unknown species had arrived in overwhelming numbers, systematically destroying Zephyrian settlements and harvesting their population. "Sir," his communications officer, a crystalline Vorthin named Keslu, chimed with melodic tones, "the Zephyrian government is requesting immediate military assistance. They're offering to pay triple the standard defense contract rate." Thexani's mandibles clicked in contemplation. The Zephyrians were known throughout the galaxy as master terraformers, their peaceful nature making them valuable allies in expanding habitable worlds. However, their pacifist culture meant they possessed virtually no military capabilities beyond basic planetary defense shields. "What's our estimated time to arrival?" Thexani asked his navigation officer. 17 days at maximum burn, Commander. However, our intelligence division reports that the attacking force consists of at least 40 Dreadnought-class vessels of unknown origin. Our current fleet strength is insufficient for direct engagement. The bridge fell silent except for the soft hum of the ship's systems. Thexani weighed his options carefully. The Galactic Council's primary directive emphasized the preservation of member species, but it also demanded tactical wisdom. Sending his fleet into what appeared to be a massacre would serve no one. "Send our regrets to the Zephyrian government," he decided finally. "Inform them that we're dispatching a reconnaissance probe to assess the situation, but our main fleet must remain on standby to protect core Council worlds." Similar scenes played out across a dozen other military commands throughout the galaxy. The proud Centaurian Empire, masters of plasma weaponry, deemed the rescue mission tactically unsound. The Rigelian Star Navy, with their advanced shielding technology, declared the Kepler 442 system outside their operational parameters. Even the militant Dracorian hegemony, known for their aggressive expansionist policies, cited insufficient strategic value for intervention. The pattern was clear. When faced with an unknown threat of superior numbers, even the galaxy's most powerful civilizations chose caution over heroism. The Zephyrians' fate seemed sealed. Meanwhile, in the Outer Rim territories where the so-called Deathworlds resided, a very different conversation was taking place. Captain Vextar of the Proxima Liberation Front stood before a holographic war table aboard his battle-scarred vessel, the Razor's Edge. The massive Corathan warrior's chitinous exoskeleton bore the scars of countless battles, each mark a testament to survival on one of the galaxy's most hostile planets. "The Council fleets are running scared," growled his first officer, a cybernetically enhanced Vorian named ZYX. 40 ships have them spooked. Remember when we took on 60 hegemony cruisers with half our current force? Vextar's compound eyes studied the tactical display. His species had evolved on Karatha Prime, where the very air was toxic to most galactic species, and the native predators could shred starship hulls with their claws. The Karatans had learned that survival meant fighting impossible odds and winning. "The Zephyrians are good people," Vextar said, his voice a deep rumble. "They terraformed 17 worlds for refugee species after the Thanatos War. No questions asked, no payment demanded." Around the table, representatives from various Deathworld species nodded in agreement. There was Kthara, a Nexian whose homeworld experienced gravity 3 times galactic standard. Beside her stood Bronx, a heavily scarred Valerian whose people had survived on a planet where the dominant life forms were sentient hurricanes. Each warrior present had earned their place through trials that would have killed most civilized species. How many ships can we muster? Vextar asked. ZYX consulted his neural interface. 8 heavy cruisers, 15 frigates, and 37 fighter squadrons. Not exactly overwhelming firepower against 40 dreadnoughts. Numbers aren't everything, Thara interjected, her serpentine form coiling with anticipation. The galaxy's elite fleets rely on shields and standoff weapons. They've forgotten how to fight dirty. The meeting continued for hours as the Deathworld commanders planned their desperate mission. They would travel to Kepler 442 not because they had a reasonable chance of victory, but because sometimes doing the right thing mattered more than tactical wisdom. As their small fleet prepared for departure, long-range sensors detected another vessel approaching the system from an entirely different vector. The ship's profile was unlike anything in the galactic databases, sleek yet brutally functional, with weapon ports that suggested devastating close-range capabilities. The vessel transmitted an identification signal that made even the hardened Deathworld warriors pause in surprise. It was human. Earth had been discovered only 3 years earlier by a Centaurian exploration vessel that had suffered a catastrophic navigation failure. The scout ship had limped into the Sol system expecting to find a primitive civilization, if any life at all. Instead, they encountered a species that had not only achieved spaceflight, but had been quietly exploring their local stellar neighborhood for decades. Humanity's first contact with galactic civilization had been carefully orchestrated by the Council. The standard protocol involved gradual introduction to galactic culture, technology transfer agreements, and eventual membership consideration. Most species took centuries to fully integrate into the galactic community. Humans had absorbed galactic technology, improved upon it, and begun building their own starships within 18 months. The human vessel approaching Kepler 442 was the UES Indomitable, a prototype warship that represented humanity's interpretation of galactic combat doctrine. Where most species favored either overwhelming firepower or impenetrable defenses, humans had opted for something the galaxy hadn't seen before: adaptive technology that could modify itself during combat. Captain Sarah Chun stood on the Indomitable's bridge, reviewing the tactical situation with her mixed-species crew. The bridge itself was a testament to human adaptability, featuring workstations designed for the various alien crew members who had chosen to serve aboard Earth's newest vessel. Captain, reported Lieutenant Commander Voss, a Centaurian who had volunteered for the human Navy after witnessing their training methods. We're detecting the Deathworld fleet on an intercept course. Their ships are primitive by galactic standards. Chun studied the tactical display, her dark eyes analyzing the formation patterns of both the approaching Deathworld fleet and the unknown alien vessels besieging the Zephyrian colony. At 35, she was considered young for a starship captain, but her rise through the ranks had been meteoric following humanity's first successful defense against a pirate raid. Primitive doesn't mean ineffective, she replied. Those Deathworld species didn't survive by building pretty ships. They built functional ones. Her science officer, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, looked up from her console with concern. Captain, our analysis of the attacking ships suggests technology significantly advanced beyond current galactic standard. Their energy signatures don't match any known species in the databases. Unknown hostiles with superior technology attacking peaceful civilians while the major powers stand aside. Chen mused. Sound familiar? She was referring to humanity's own history, where countless conflicts have been decided not by who had the better technology, but by who was willing to fight hardest for what they believed in. The same spirit that had driven humans to explore dangerous frontiers now compelled them toward this desperate mission. Communications, open a channel to the Deathworld fleet, Chun ordered. Moments later, the image of Captain Vextar appeared on the main view screen. The Corothan warrior studied the human captain with interest, his compound eyes registering details that most species would miss. Captain Chun, Vextar rumbled in heavily accented Standard Galactic. I've heard stories about your species. They say humans are either very brave or very stupid. Often both. Chun replied with a slight smile. I assume you're here for the same reason we are. The Zephyrians need help, and everyone else is too scared to provide it, Vextar confirmed. My fleet is fast and tough, but we lack the firepower to break through their siege formations. Chun studied the tactical display once more. The unknown aliens had established a blockade around the Zephyrian homeworld, with their largest vessels positioned to prevent any escape attempts. Smaller ships were systematically destroying orbital infrastructure and landing forces on the planet's surface. What do you know about these attackers? She asked. ZYX's image joined the conversation from the Corothan ship's bridge. Our intelligence suggests they're harvesting the Zephyrian population. Not killing them outright, but taking them alive. Their technology appears to be biological in nature, which explains why they're not in our databases. Bioships, Dr. Tanaka whispered from her station. That would explain the unusual energy signatures. Chun felt a chill run down her spine. In humanity's darkest fiction, alien species that harvested other life forms were among the most terrifying enemies imaginable. The reality of facing such a threat was sobering. Captain Vextar, she said, her voice taking on a more formal tone, I propose we coordinate our approach. Your ships know how to survive against overwhelming odds. My ship can adapt to counter their technology as we learn more about it. You have a plan? Vextar asked, his mandibles clicking with interest. The beginning of one, Chun admitted. But it will require us to do something that goes against standard galactic naval doctrine, which is, we're going to get close enough to hurt them. The two fleets adjusted their courses, moving toward a rendezvous point 3 light hours from the Kepler 442 system. As they traveled, both crews worked frantically to prepare for a battle that their sensors suggested they had little chance of winning. Aboard the Indomitable, Chief Engineer Rodriguez worked with Dr. Tanaka to modify their weapon systems based on the limited data they had about bioships. Their adaptive technology gave them advantages that traditional galactic vessels lacked, but they would need every edge they could get. On the Deathworld ships, veteran warriors checked their equipment and shared stories of previous impossible victories. They had learned long ago that survival often depended more on determination than firepower. As both fleets approached the system, they began intercepting fragmentary communications from the besieged planet. The Zephyrian government was broadcasting increasingly desperate pleas for assistance, while surface reports described systematic harvesting operations that were claiming thousands of lives daily. Time was running out, and help was finally on the way. The question was whether two small fleets of stubborn warriors could succeed where the galaxy's greatest military powers had refused to try. The joint fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, immediately activating stealth protocols to avoid detection. What they found waiting for them was worse than their worst intelligence estimates had suggested. The alien fleet consisted of 43 massive vessels, but calling them ships seemed inadequate. Each one appeared to be a living organism the size of a city, with organic hulls that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Smaller creatures swarmed around them like antibodies, some clearly fulfilling fighter roles, while others appeared to be transports carrying harvested Zephyrians. Captain Chun watched the tactical display with growing unease. Dr. Tanaka, are you getting these readings? Confirmed, Captain, the science officer replied, her voice tight with concentration. These aren't constructed vessels. They're grown. Each one is a single organism with what appears to be a distributed nervous system. The energy signatures suggest they're feeding off some kind of biological fuel source. From the razor's edge, Captain Vextar's voice crackled over the communication channel. By the 7 hells of Karatha, they're eating the population. The horrifying reality of the situation became clear as their sensors detected the transport organisms returning to the main fleet with their cargo holds full of Zephyrian civilians. The bioships were literally consuming an entire civilization, processing living beings into whatever fuel source powered their grotesque fleet. Captain, reported Lieutenant Commander Voss, I'm detecting massive energy buildups in the central organism. It's approximately 10 times larger than the others and appears to be some kind of command structure. Chun studied the creature ship with professional detachment, fighting down the human revulsion that threatened to cloud her judgment. The thing was over 8 kilometers long, its surface covered in what looked like sensory organs and weapon ports that opened and closed like breathing vents. ZYX here, came a gravelly voice from the Deathworld fleet. My people have experience fighting biological horrors. These things will have distributed vulnerabilities rather than critical systems. We can't just target their bridge or engine rooms. Agreed, Chen replied. But they also can't shut down non-essential systems like mechanical ships can. Every part of them needs to stay alive, which means they'll have resource limitations we can exploit. The combined fleet spent 6 hours in silent observation, mapping the alien formations and studying their behavior patterns. The bio ships moved with an eerie coordination that suggested some form of hive mind, but there were subtle variations that indicated individual consciousness within the collective. Dr. Tanaka made the first breakthrough. Captain, I think I understand their energy distribution system. Each organism has what appears to be a central nervous cluster that coordinates with the others through bioelectric pulses. If we could disrupt those communications, they'd lose formation cohesion, Chen finished. But how do we target something we can't see through their hulls? We don't, Vextar interjected over the comm. We make them show us. Korthan pack hunters use a similar tactic against rock borers. We force them to expose their vulnerabilities by threatening something they need to protect. The command organism, Chen realized. If we threaten their central node, the others will have to respond in a pattern that reveals their communication methods. The plan that emerged was audacious even by Deathworld standards. The human ship would use its adaptive capabilities to mimic the bioelectric signatures of the alien fleet, allowing it to penetrate their formation undetected. Meanwhile, the Deathworld ships would position themselves for a coordinated strike that would force the aliens to reveal their coordination methods. One problem, Thara hissed from her ship's bridge. Once you're inside their formation, you'll be surrounded by 43 hostile organisms, each one capable of tearing apart a dreadnought. That's why we're not going in to fight, Chen replied. We're going in to learn. The Indomitable has enough adaptive armor to survive long enough to map their communication network. Once we have that data, we can plan a real attack. Chief Engineer Rodriguez worked frantically to modify their hull plating to emit the bioelectric patterns they had observed. The human ship's adaptive technology was pushed to its limits, essentially turning the Indomitable into a Trojan horse capable of infiltrating the alien fleet. As preparations continued, more disturbing intelligence came to light. The planet's surface was being systematically stripped of all organic matter. Forests, crops, and livestock were being consumed along with the Zephyrian population. The aliens weren't just harvesting people, they were devouring an entire biosphere. This is genocide, whispered Lieutenant Tavara, a Vularian tactical officer whose normally stoic demeanor cracked at the scope of the destruction. It's worse than genocide, Chen replied grimly. Genocide destroys a people. This destroys an entire world's capacity to support life. The final preparations took 14 hours. During that time, the alien fleet consumed 3 more major Zephyrian cities and began extending their harvesting operations to the planet's oceans. Time was running out for the surviving population. The Indomitable moved first, its disguised hull emissions allowing it to approach the alien fleet without triggering an immediate response. The bioship's sensory organs tracked the human vessel, but their limited intelligence couldn't distinguish between the artificial bioelectric patterns and their own natural communications. Chun felt her stomach clench as they passed between 2 of the smaller organisms. Up close, the alien ships were even more horrifying than their sensors had suggested. The hulls weren't just organic. They were actively alive, with visible blood vessels pulsing beneath translucent skin and clusters of eyes that tracked their movement with predatory intelligence. Captain, Dr. Tanaka whispered, I'm reading massive neural activity from all surrounding vessels. They know we don't belong here, but they can't figure out what we are. How long before they decide we're a threat? Chen asked. Unknown. But I'd estimate we have perhaps 20 minutes before their confusion turns to aggression. The Indomitable continued deeper into the formation, its sensors working frantically to map the bioelectric communications network that linked the alien fleet. The pattern that emerged was complex beyond anything in galactic scientific literature. Each organism maintained individual consciousness while participating in a collective decision-making process that operated on multiple levels simultaneously. It's like watching a living galaxy, Tanaka breathed. Each ship is a neuron in a massive brain, but each neuron also has its own thoughts and desires. The breakthrough came when they reached the formation center. The command organism was truly massive, its hull studded with sensory clusters that pulsed with coordinated light patterns. As the Indomitable passed beneath it, their sensors detected the central nervous cluster that coordinated the entire fleet. There, Chen pointed to a section of the creature's underside where the bioelectric activity was most intense. That's their coordination center. If we can disrupt it, the entire fleet loses cohesion, Dr. Tanaka confirmed. But, Captain, the power requirements to penetrate their biological shielding would drain our entire energy grid. Then, we'll have to get creative. Chen activated the communication link to the Deathworld fleet. Vextar, are your people in position? Ready when you are, Captain. Our weapons are targeted on the perimeter vessels. Once we open fire, they'll all turn to face us. Good. When they do, their coordination patterns will shift to combat mode. That should expose the communication pathways Dr. Tanaka identified. And then? Then, we find out if human engineering is tougher than alien biology. The attack began with a coordinated strike from the Deathworld fleet. 37 fighter squadrons screamed out of the void, their weapons blazing as they engaged the smaller bio ships on the formation's perimeter. The aliens responded exactly as predicted, turning to face the new threat with single-minded purpose. The shift in their formation created exactly the opportunity Chun had hoped for. As the bio ships moved into combat positions, their communication network reconfigured itself, exposing the neural pathways that linked each organism to the central command structure. Now, Chun shouted. The Indomitable dropped its disguise and opened fire with everything it had. But instead of targeting the command organism's hull, they focused on the exposed neural pathways that connected it to its subordinates. The human ship's adaptive weapons modified themselves in real time, shifting from traditional energy beams to focused electromagnetic pulses designed to disrupt biological nervous systems. The effect was immediate and devastating. The command organism convulsed as its neural links were severed, its massive form writhing in what could only be described as agony. The smaller bio ships, suddenly cut off from their coordination source, began attacking each other in confusion. But the victory was short-lived. The alien fleet's distributed intelligence began adapting to the attack, with individual organisms establishing new communication links through backup neural pathways. Within minutes, they would have restored enough coordination to overwhelm both fleets. Captain, ZYX's voice crackled over the communication system. The big one is regenerating its neural network faster than we can disrupt it. Chen watched the tactical display with growing alarm. The command organism was indeed healing itself, new neural pathways sprouting like organic circuitry. Their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. All ships, focus fire on the command organism's neural clusters, she ordered. We need to keep it disrupted long enough for the Deathworld fleet to break through their perimeter. The combined fleet concentrated their firepower on the massive central bioship, but their weapons were having diminishing effects as the creature adapted to their attack patterns. Worse, the smaller organisms were beginning to coordinate again, their distributed intelligence finding new ways to communicate despite the disruption. Captain, Dr. Tanaka reported urgently, the neural regeneration rate is accelerating. I think our attacks are actually stimulating their adaptive responses. It was a sobering realization. The bioships were learning from their attacks, developing resistance to their weapons in real time. What had initially been an effective strategy was rapidly becoming counterproductive. Vextar, Chun called over the communication channel. We need a new approach. Our weapons are making them stronger. Understood, the Korathan captain rumbled. My people have dealt with adaptive predators before. Sometimes the best strategy isn't to attack their strengths, but to make them waste their resources on unnecessary adaptations. Explain. We make them adapt to threats that don't actually exist. Force them to waste their biological energy on countermeasures for attacks we're not really planning. It was a brilliant tactic that played to humanity's greatest strength, deception. While the galaxy's other species relied on overwhelming force or advanced technology, humans had perfected the art of making their enemies defeat themselves. The new strategy required split-second timing and perfect coordination between the two fleets. As the bioships continued their regeneration, the combined force began transmitting false attack patterns designed to trigger adaptive responses to non-existent threats. The aliens fell for it completely. Their organisms began developing countermeasures for weapons that weren't being used, biological armor against attack patterns that were purely theoretical, and communication protocols to defend against disruption methods that existed only as false signals. Within an hour, the bioships had exhausted their adaptive energy on useless modifications, leaving them vulnerable to the simple, direct attacks that had been working all along. The tide of battle was turning, but the cost had been severe. 3 Deathworld vessels had been destroyed, and the Indomitable's adaptive systems were operating at dangerous overload levels. The question now was whether they could press their advantage before their own resources ran out. The bioships' exhaustion from their misguided adaptations created a critical window of opportunity, but Captain Shin knew they had minutes, not hours, before the alien fleet recovered. The command organism was already showing signs of redirecting its regenerative resources toward practical defenses. All ships, execute pattern Delta 7, Chun ordered, invoking a combat formation that had never been tested outside a simulation. The Deathworld vessels and the Indomitable moved into a complex, three-dimensional pattern that maximized their firepower while minimizing their exposure to counterattack. Aboard the Razor's Edge, Vextar watched his tactical display with the calculating gaze of a predator. His people had evolved on a world where hesitation meant death, and he recognized the moment when calculated aggression became necessary for survival. Thara, take your squadron and target the harvesting vessels, he commanded. If we can't save everyone, we'll at least prevent more from being taken. The Nexian captain's serpentine form coiled with anticipation. Understood. What about the transport organisms already loaded with prisoners? We'll worry about rescues after we stop the harvesting, Vextar replied grimly. The decision weighed heavily on him, but tactical reality demanded priorities. They couldn't save the already captured if they failed to stop the ongoing genocide. The combined fleet's assault focused on the bioship's resource management systems. Dr. Tanaka had identified that each organism maintained a delicate balance between growth, adaptation, and combat capability. By forcing them to exceed their energy budgets, the attacking force could trigger systemic failures that would be far more effective than conventional weapons. The Indomitable led the charge, its adaptive hull configuration allowing it to present constantly changing profiles to the alien sensors. Chief Engineer Rodriguez had pushed their modification systems beyond all safety parameters, causing the ship to literally reshape itself during combat. Captain, hull stress is approaching critical levels, Rodriguez reported from the engineering deck. These modifications were never meant to be sustained during active combat. How long can you hold it together? Chun asked, watching as another bioship succumbed to energy depletion and began dissolving into its component organic matter. Maybe 20 minutes, assuming nothing else goes wrong. Of course, something else immediately went wrong. Long-range sensors detected a new group of bioships emerging from hyperspace, their massive forms materializing like nightmares made manifest. The reinforcements were even larger than the original fleet, with the lead organism dwarfing the current command ship. "Oh, hell," muttered Lieutenant Commander Voss. "Captain, I'm reading 47 new contacts, including what appears to be a Queen-class organism." Chun felt her blood chill. A Queen-class bioship would have intelligence and adaptive capabilities far beyond anything they had yet encountered. Worse, its presence suggested that this wasn't just a random harvesting operation, but part of a larger invasion strategy. "Vextar, are you seeing this?" she called over the communication channel. "Unfortunately, yes," the Corathan captain rumbled. "My tactical computers are having difficulty processing the energy signatures from that queen organism. It's substantial." That was Corathan understatement at its finest. The queen bioship was over 15 kilometers long and appeared to be composed of multiple organisms that had merged into a single entity. Its hull pulsed with complex patterns that suggested intelligence beyond anything in the galactic databases. "Dr. Tanaka," Chin called, "what can you tell me about that thing?" Her science officer's face had gone pale as she studied the sensor readings. "Captain, that organism shows neural complexity equivalent to an entire planetary civilization. It's not just intelligent. It's a collective consciousness made up of millions of individual minds." The tactical situation had just gone from desperate to impossible. The original biofleet was already recovering from their energy depletion, and now they were reinforced by an enemy that outclassed them in every conceivable way. "All ships fall back to defensive positions around the planet," Chen ordered. "We can't win a direct engagement with those odds." But as the combined fleet began their withdrawal, the queen organism did something unexpected. Instead of immediately joining the battle, it began communicating with the planetary surface through bioelectric pulses that were visible to the naked eye. The massive creature was apparently more interested in the harvesting operation than in destroying the small fleet that had been disrupting it. "Captain," Dr. Tanaka called out excitedly, "I think I know why they're not pursuing us." "Explain." "The queen organism isn't here to fight. It's here to feed. Our attack has disrupted their harvesting schedule, and they're prioritizing restoration of that operation over dealing with us." It was a crucial insight that opened up new tactical possibilities. The bioships weren't just predators. They were farmers cultivating an entire world as their food source. The Queen's presence indicated that the Zephyrian system was particularly valuable to them, possibly serving as a breeding ground for new bioships. If we can disrupt their feeding process, Chen realized, we might be able to force them to choose between fighting us and completing their harvest. And since they're biologically driven to feed, Vextar added from his ship, we might be able to manipulate their priorities. The plan that emerged was audacious even by their standards. Instead of fighting the biofleet directly, they would target the planetary infrastructure that the aliens were using to process their harvest. By destroying the harvesting facilities, they could force the queen organism to choose between immediate survival needs and long-term strategic objectives. "There's just one problem," Thara pointed out from her squadron's position. "To reach the harvesting facilities, we'll have to penetrate the planet's atmosphere while under fire from 90 bioships." "Not all 90, Chen corrected. "The queen organism won't risk itself in atmospheric combat. Too much chance of planetary contamination if she's damaged. And the smaller organisms will be focused on protecting their harvesting operations. So we'll only face about 60 bioships in atmosphere," Zhuwaix commented dryly. "That's much more reasonable." The atmospheric assault began with the Deathworld fighter squadrons diving into the planet's upper atmosphere at maximum velocity. Their ships were built for extreme conditions, and the Zephyrian atmosphere was relatively benign compared to the toxic hellscapes they called home. The bioships responded exactly as predicted, with the smaller organisms following the fighters into atmosphere, while the larger creatures remained in orbit. The queen organism established a high-orbit position where she could coordinate the defense without risking exposure to planetary contaminants. The Indomitable followed the fighters into atmosphere, its adaptive hull configuration allowing it to function as both spacecraft and atmospheric fighter. Chief Engineer Rodriguez had exceeded all safety margins to maintain the ship's modification systems. But the gamble was paying off as they evaded pursuing bioships through a series of atmospheric maneuvers that should have been impossible for a vessel of their size. Rodriguez, how are the hull modifications holding up? Chen asked as they pulled a high G turn that would have liquefied most alien pilots. I've got microfractures forming in 17 different sections, and our adaptive matrix is running on pure stubbornness at this point, the engineer replied. But we're still flying. The planet's surface revealed the true horror of the alien harvest. Entire continents had been stripped of organic matter, leaving behind landscapes that looked like open wounds. The bioships had established massive processing centers where captured Zephyrians were being converted into the biological fuel that powered their fleet. But the sight that made even the hardened Deathworld warriors pause was the nursery facilities. The aliens weren't just harvesting the current population. They were breeding new generations of Zephyrians as a renewable food source. Thousands of young Zephyrians were being held in grotesque organic pods that accelerated their growth while preparing them for eventual consumption. Those monsters, Thara hissed over the communication channel. They're not just killing them, they're farming them like livestock. The revelation added new urgency to their mission. This wasn't just about stopping a single harvesting operation. It was about preventing the Zephyrian species from being turned into a perpetual food source for the biofleet. The attacking force split into multiple groups, each targeting different aspects of the harvesting infrastructure. Vextar led his heavy cruisers against the main processing centers, while Cthulhu's fighters focused on the nursery facilities. The Indomitable took on the most dangerous target, the bioship's ground-based coordination center, where the queen organism's influence was strongest. The coordination center was a massive organic structure that looked like a cross between a brain and a cancer tumor. Its pulsing surface was covered with neural interfaces that allowed the queen organism to directly control ground operations despite remaining safely in orbit. Dr. Tanaka, what's the best way to disrupt that thing? Chun asked as they approached the structure under heavy fire from defending bioships. The neural interfaces are the key, the science officer replied, her voice strained as she worked to maintain the ship's targeting systems under combat conditions. If we can sever the Queen's connection to ground operations, her coordination ability will be severely limited. The Indomitable's adaptive weapons modified themselves for the specific task, shifting from energy beams to focused electromagnetic pulses designed to disrupt biological neural networks. The first strikes were devastatingly effective, causing the coordination center to convulse as its neural links were severed. But the Queen organism's response was swift and terrible. Deprived of her ground-based coordination ability, she began descending toward the planet's surface, her massive form casting shadows over entire continents as she moved. Captain Dr. Tanaka called out in alarm. If an organism that size enters atmosphere, the disruption to planetary weather patterns could kill every survivor on the planet. Chen faced an impossible choice. They could continue their attack on the coordination center, forcing the Queen to descend and inadvertently destroying the planet they were trying to save. Or they could allow the aliens to maintain their coordination advantage and accept defeat in a battle they had been slowly winning. All ships, cease fire on ground targets, she ordered reluctantly. We can't save the planet by destroying it. But as the Queen organism began her descent, something unexpected happened. The massive creature's gravitational influence began disrupting the orbital patterns of her own fleet, causing several bioships to collide as their organic navigation systems struggled to compensate for the altered gravitational field. Captain, Dr. Tanaka called out excitedly, the Queen's descent is destabilizing her own fleet. It was the break they needed. The biofleet's coordination was breaking down as individual organisms struggled to maintain formation in the altered gravitational environment. For the first time since the battle began, the attacking force had a genuine tactical advantage. All ships, target the confused bioships, Chun ordered. Hit them while they're disorganized. The combined fleet's weapons concentrated on the disoriented alien vessels, destroying 3 bioships in rapid succession before the Queen organism realized the tactical error and began ascending back to safe orbit. But the damage was done. The alien fleet's coordination had been shattered, and their numerical advantage was rapidly eroding. The tide of battle was finally turning in favor of the defenders, but Chen knew their victory would be temporary unless they could find a way to deal with the Queen organism permanently. The massive creature was already adapting to the gravitational disruption, and soon she would restore coordination to her remaining forces. The next phase of the battle would determine whether their desperate gambit could succeed, or whether the Zephyrian system would fall to an enemy that viewed entire civilizations as nothing more than food. The Queen organism's retreat to safe orbit had given the combined fleet a temporary reprieve, but Captain Chen knew their advantage wouldn't last long. Already, the massive creature was re-establishing communication with her remaining bioships, and her adaptive intelligence was learning from the tactical mistakes that had cost her fleet dearly. Damage report, Chen called as the Indomitable climbed back towards space, its hull bearing scars from the atmospheric engagement. Hull integrity at 63%, Chief Engineer Rodriguez reported, his voice tight with exhaustion. Adaptive systems are operating at 30% efficiency, and I've got complete failures in sections 7 through 12. Captain, we can't take another engagement like that. Around them, the Deathworld fleet was in similar condition. 3 more vessels have been lost in the atmospheric battle, and the survivors were operating on emergency power and sheer determination. They had succeeded in disrupting the alien harvesting operation, but at a cost that left them vulnerable to any sustained counterattack. Vextar, Chen called over the communication channel. What's your fleet status? The Corathan captain's response was characteristically blunt. Half our ships are running on fumes, and the other half are running on pride. We bought the Zephyrians some time, but unless those reinforcements show up soon, we're all dead. The reinforcements he referred to were theoretical at best. Before the battle began, they had transmitted a detailed tactical report to the Galactic Council, hoping that evidence of the bioship's true nature would convince at least one major fleet to intervene. So far, there had been no response. Dr. Tanaka looked up from her science station with grim news. Captain, the Queen organism is adapting to our weapons. Her neural patterns are shifting to compensate for electromagnetic disruption, and she's developing biological shielding against our most effective attack methods. How long before she's completely immune? Chen asked. At current adaptation rates, perhaps 4 hours. But, Captain, there's something else. The Queen isn't just adapting defensively. She's preparing for reproduction. The implications hit Chen like a physical blow. If the Queen organism succeeded in reproducing while orbiting the Zephyrian homeworld, the resulting offspring would be born with genetic adaptations to counter their weapons. The biofleet would become permanently immune to their attack methods. How long until reproduction? She asked quietly. Unknown, but the biological energy buildup suggests hours rather than days. Chun stared at the tactical display, watching as the Queen organism's massive form pulsed with reproductive energy. The battle had evolved beyond a simple rescue mission. They were now fighting to prevent the birth of a new generation of bioships that would be virtually unstoppable. Captain, Lieutenant Commander Voss called from his station. I'm detecting long-range transmission bursts from the Queen organism. She's calling for additional reinforcements. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Not only were they facing an enemy that was adapting to their weapons, but more bioships were en route to join the battle. The combined fleet had perhaps hours before they would be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. All ships, fall back to the asteroid field at the system's edge, Chen ordered. We need time to regroup and plan our next move. As the fleet withdrew, Chen called an emergency conference with the Deathworld commanders. The holographic images of Vextar, Cthara, and the other survivors appeared on the Indomitable's bridge, their faces showing the strain of prolonged combat. Options? Chen asked without preamble. We've hurt them, Vextar rumbled, but not enough. That queen organism is the key to their entire operation. As long as she survives, they can regenerate losses and adapt to our tactics. Destroying her directly isn't an option, Thara added, her serpentine form coiling with frustration. She's too large, too well defended, and too intelligent to fall for the same tricks twice. Dr. Tanaka cleared her throat hesitantly. Captain, I may have an idea, but it would require a significant sacrifice. Explain. The queen organism's reproductive process requires massive amounts of biological energy. If we could force her to expend that energy on defensive adaptations instead of reproduction, we might be able to delay the birth of her offspring indefinitely. How do we force her to waste reproductive energy? Chen asked. By making her think she's under constant attack from weapons that don't actually exist. We would need to create false threats that seem credible enough to trigger her adaptive responses, but the false signals would have to be transmitted from extremely close range to be convincing. Vextar's compound eyes focused on a human captain with sudden understanding. You're talking about a suicide run. Not necessarily, Dr. Tanaka replied, though her voice lacked conviction. If we could modify one of our ships to emit false bioelectric signatures while approaching the queen organism, we might be able to convince her to waste her reproductive energy on unnecessary adaptations. But the ship would have to maintain the deception until she exhausted her energy reserves. How long would that take? Thara asked. Hours, possibly days. And the ship would have to remain within the queen's defensive perimeter the entire time. Chin studied the tactical display, her mind racing through possibilities. The plan was essentially asking one ship to sacrifice itself to save the others, but it might be their only chance to prevent the queen from reproducing. What kind of ship would we need for this mission? She asked. Something with advanced adaptive systems, Dr. Tanaka replied. The false signals would have to be constantly modified to stay ahead of the queen's counter-adaptations. The Indomitable, Chen realized. Our adaptive technology is the only system advanced enough to maintain the deception for extended periods. Captain, Chief Engineer Rodriguez interjected from his station. Our adaptive systems are already operating at critical levels. This kind of mission would burn out every modification matrix we have, and probably kill everyone aboard when the Queen realizes she's been deceived, Vextar added bluntly. Chin closed her eyes, weighing the impossible decision. Sacrificing her ship and crew went against every instinct she had as a captain, but the alternative was allowing the bio-fleet to reproduce and spread throughout the galaxy, consuming entire civilizations as they went. There's another option, she said quietly. What if we don't tell the queen organism we're deceiving her? What if we make the threats real? Dr. Tanaka's eyes widened as she understood the implication. Captain, you're talking about actually attacking the queen with weapons we know won't work, just to force her to waste energy defending against them. Exactly. We make a genuine attack using weapons that we know will fail, but we make it convincing enough that she has to respond. Every failed attack forces her to develop new defenses, which drains the energy she needs for reproduction. That's... Vextar paused, his mandibles clicking as he considered the proposal. That's actually brilliant. Instead of trying to kill her, we trick her into killing herself through exhaustion. The plan required precise coordination between all surviving ships. The Deathworld vessels would provide covering fire while the Indomitable approached the queen organism, broadcasting false weapon signatures that would trigger defensive responses. The key was making each attack seem genuinely threatening while ensuring they didn't actually damage the queen enough to interfere with her energy expenditure. How many attack runs can we manage before she adapts to the deception? Chen asked. Unknown, Dr. Tanaka admitted. But every successful deception drains more of her reproductive energy. If we can maintain the illusion long enough, she might exhaust herself completely. Preparations for the desperate gambit took 3 hours. Chief Engineer Rodriguez worked to modify the Indomitable's weapons to produce convincing but ultimately harmless energy signatures, while the Deathworld fleet positioned themselves to provide supporting fire that would mask the human ship's true intentions. Captain Dr. Tanaka reported as they prepared for the first attack run. The queen organism's reproductive energy buildup has increased by 30%. She's accelerating the process, probably in response to our earlier attacks. Then, we're running out of time, Chen replied. All ships, initiate attack pattern Alpha 9. The combined fleet emerged from the asteroid field with weapons blazing, but their true target wasn't the queen organism's hull. Instead, they focused on creating energy patterns that would convince the massive creature that she was under attack from weapons far more dangerous than they actually possessed. The deception worked perfectly. The queen organism's defensive systems responded to each false threat with increasingly sophisticated countermeasures, burning through biological energy at an alarming rate. Her reproductive processes slowed as her body diverted resources to defense. But the queen's intelligence was formidable, and she began to recognize the patterns in their attacks. By the fourth run, her adaptive responses were becoming more efficient, requiring less energy to counter each perceived threat. She's learning too fast, Dr. Tanaka warned. We need to escalate the deception before she realizes what we're doing. How do we escalate a deception without making it real? Chen asked. We don't. Vextar interjected from his ship. Captain, I'm reading massive energy signatures from the system's edge. The Queen's reinforcements have arrived. The tactical display updated to show 12 new bio ships dropping out of hyperspace, including another Queen-class organism. The battle they had been slowly winning was about to become impossible. All ships, emergency acceleration toward the Queen organism, Chun ordered. If we're going to do this, it has to be now. The Indomitable and the surviving Deathworld vessels launched themselves at the Queen organism in a desperate final assault. Their weapons fired continuously, creating a light show that would have been visible from neighboring star systems. But as they approached the massive creature, something unexpected happened. The Queen organism's reproductive processes suddenly accelerated, her massive form beginning to split along biomechanical lines as her offspring prepared to emerge. Captain, Dr. Tanaka called out in alarm. She's not exhausting her energy on defenses anymore. She's channeling everything into emergency reproduction. Chen realized with horror that their deception had backfired. Instead of depleting the Queen's reproductive energy, they had convinced her that the threat level required immediate reproduction to ensure species survival. In minutes, there would be 2 Queen organisms instead of 1. All ships, target the reproductive chambers. Chen shouted, We have to stop the birth process. The combined fleet concentrated their fire on the Queen organism's reproductive sections, but their weapons were having minimal effect on a massive creature's biological armor. Worse, the emerging offspring was already showing signs of the adaptive mutations that would make it immune to their attack methods. As the situation deteriorated beyond all hope of recovery, Chen made a decision that went against every principle of sound military tactics. If they couldn't stop the birth through conventional weapons, they would have to try something that had never been attempted in the history of galactic warfare. Rodriguez, she called to her chief engineer, how much power can we divert from life support? Captain, you're not seriously considering ramming that thing? I'm considering something much more dangerous, Chen replied. Can we overload our adaptive matrix to create a massive electromagnetic pulse? Rodriguez's face went pale as he understood the implication. It would destroy our ship and probably kill everyone within a light-minute radius, including the Queen's offspring. Captain, that's suicide. Chen looked around the bridge at her crew, seeing the same desperate determination in their eyes that she felt in her heart. They had come to save the Zephyrians, and sometimes salvation required sacrifice. It's only suicide if we fail, she replied quietly. If we succeed, it's heroism. The Indomitable's crew worked with desperate efficiency as they prepared for what might be their final moments. Chief Engineer Rodriguez rerouted power from every non-essential system, while Dr. Tanaka calculated the precise overload sequence needed to create an electromagnetic pulse powerful enough to disrupt the queen organism's reproductive process. Captain, Lieutenant Commander Voss reported, his Centaurian features pale with stress. The queen's offspring is nearly mature. Neural activity suggests it will be born with full adaptive immunities to our weapons. Chun watched the tactical display as the massive queen organism continued its reproductive process, the emerging offspring already showing biological characteristics that would make it virtually invulnerable to conventional attack. Around them, the 12 reinforcement bioships had taken defensive positions, creating an impenetrable barrier between the queen and any escape route. "How long until the overload sequence is ready?" she asked Rodriguez. 3 minutes, Captain. But I need to warn you, the electromagnetic pulse will propagate along our hull's adaptive matrix. Anyone touching ship's systems when it detonates will be killed instantly. Understood. All hands, prepare for electromagnetic pulse detonation. Secure all equipment and avoid contact with ship systems. Across the communication channel, Vexstar's voice crackled with static. "Captain Chun, my sensors show your ship building up massive energy readings. What's your plan?" "We're going to stop the queen from reproducing," Chun replied simply. "Whatever happens to us, continue the mission. Save as many Zephyrians as you can." "Human," Vexstar said, his voice carrying a tone of respect that was rare among Corothan warriors. "It has been an honor fighting beside your species." "The honor was ours," Chun replied. As the Indomitable accelerated toward the queen organism, Dr. Tanaka made a final discovery that changed everything about their mission. "Captain, the queen's reproductive process isn't just creating offspring. She's transferring her consciousness into the new organism. If we destroy her while the transfer is incomplete, we might be able to trap her consciousness in a dying body." "Explain." "The neural patterns suggest she's moving her core intelligence into the offspring while retaining a backup consciousness in her original form. But during the transfer, both organisms are vulnerable. If we time our attack perfectly, we might be able to kill them both." It was a revelation that transformed their suicide mission into something with actual strategic value. They weren't just stopping one reproduction. They might be able to destroy the primary intelligence that coordinated the entire biofleet. "How long do we have?" Chun asked. "The transfer process will peak in approximately 90 seconds. That's our window." Chun activated the ship-wide communication system. "All crew members, this is the captain. In less than 2 minutes, we're going to attempt something that has never been done before. We're going to destroy an enemy that outweighs us by a factor of 10,000, using nothing but human engineering and sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat." She paused, looking around the bridge at her crew. Each face showed fear, but also determination that reminded her why humanity had earned respect throughout the galaxy despite being newcomers to galactic civilization. "If we succeed, we'll save not just the Zephyrians, but every species that might face these creatures in the future. If we fail, at least we'll fail while fighting for something worth dying for." The Indomitable closed the final distance to the queen organism as the massive creature's reproductive process reached its climax. The emerging offspring was nearly complete, its adaptive neural networks already beginning to integrate with the queen's transferred consciousness. "Overload sequence ready," Rodriguez reported from the engineering deck. "Captain, once I initiate the sequence, we'll have approximately 30 seconds before total system failure." "Do it." The ship's adaptive matrix began to overload in carefully controlled stages, each modification system burning out in sequence as massive amounts of electromagnetic energy built up in the hull plating. The Indomitable's lights flickered as power systems strained beyond their design limits. 20 seconds to detonation, Dr. Tanaka announced, her voice steady despite the circumstances. Around them, the bioships had finally realized that the human vessel was attempting something unprecedented. Several smaller organisms moved to intercept, but they were too late. The Indomitable was already within the Queen's defensive perimeter, its overloading systems creating energy readings that confuse the aliens' biological sensors. 10 seconds. Chun gripped the command chair, watching as the queen organism's offspring prepared to emerge from its reproductive chamber. The consciousness transfer was at its most vulnerable point, with the queen's intelligence divided between two biological forms. 5 seconds. Captain, Vexstar's voice came over the communication channel. Whatever you're doing, it's affecting the entire biofleet. Their coordination patterns are breaking down. 3 seconds. Chun closed her eyes and thought about Earth, about the species that had emerged from one small world to challenge the galaxy's assumption about courage and sacrifice. 1 second. The Indomitable's electromagnetic pulse erupted outward in a sphere of pure energy that temporarily outshone the system star. The wave front struck the queen organism at the precise moment when her consciousness was most vulnerable, disrupting the neural transfer and causing catastrophic failure in both the original organism and its offspring. The massive queen convulsed as her distributed consciousness collapsed, her biological systems failing in cascade as the electromagnetic pulse interfered with every neural pathway in her enormous body. Her offspring, caught in mid-emergence with only partially formed neural networks, simply dissolved as its biological cohesion failed. The pulse continued outward, striking the surrounding bioships and disrupting their coordination systems. Several smaller organisms, dependent on the Queen's guidance for basic functions, began attacking each other in confusion as their hive-mind connection severed. When the energy wave finally dissipated, the Indomitable was gone, vaporized by the same pulse that had destroyed their enemies. But the sacrifice had accomplished something unprecedented in galactic military history. A single ship had destroyed an enemy force that outnumbered it by orders of magnitude. Aboard the Razor's Edge, Vextar stared at the tactical display in amazement. The bio fleet was in complete disarray, with leaderless organisms drifting aimlessly or attacking their own forces. The death of the Queen had severed the hive-mind connection that held the fleet together. All ships, engage the disoriented bioships, he ordered. We finished what the humans started. The Deathworld fleet's weapons found their targets easily among the confused aliens. Without central coordination, the bioship's individual intelligence was insufficient to mount an effective defense. One by one, the organic vessels succumbed to focused fire from the surviving attackers. The battle that had seemed hopeless an hour earlier was suddenly winnable. The sacrifice of the Indomitable had transformed a desperate last stand into a complete victory. On the planet's surface, Zephyrian survivors emerged from shelters to see the bioship's harvest facilities shutting down as their operators died or fled. The organic processing centers began to decay without maintenance, releasing thousands of prisoners who had been scheduled for consumption. But the true impact of the battle wouldn't be felt for months, as news of the engagement spread throughout galactic civilization. The story of how a Deathworld fleet and a single human vessel had faced impossible odds while the galaxy's greatest power stood aside became a legend that inspired military academies and shaped diplomatic policy for generations. 3 months later, the Galactic Council voted to establish the Combined Defense Initiative, a military force specifically tasked with responding to threats that individual species couldn't handle alone. The initiative's first commander was Captain Kthara, whose serpentine features had become synonymous with courage throughout the galaxy. The human government was offered full membership in the Galactic Council, with voting rights normally reserved for species with millennia of spacefaring experience. Earth's representative, Admiral Sarah Rodriguez, sister of the Indomitable's chief engineer, accepted the offer with a speech that was broadcast across 1,000 worlds. My brother and Captain Chun died believing that the galaxy was worth fighting for, she said, standing before the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. They proved that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do. Humanity accepts this responsibility not because we seek power, but because we understand that with great capability comes great obligation. The Deathworld species, long marginalized by galactic society, found themselves elevated to new positions of respect and authority. Their experience with impossible survival situations made them invaluable for the new defense initiative, and several Deathworld commanders were promoted to leadership positions in the Galactic Defense Fleet. Captain Vextar became Admiral Vextar, commanding a mixed-species fleet that included vessels from dozens of worlds. His flagship, the New Indomitable, was built using human adaptive technology and crewed by volunteers from across the galaxy who wanted to serve alongside the species that had redefined courage. The bio ships never returned to Zephyrian space, but long-range scouts occasionally detected their signatures in distant galaxies. Intelligence reports suggested that the Queen's death had fragmented the species into smaller groups, reducing their threat level, but not eliminating it entirely. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, who had been on leave during the Indomitable's final mission, continued her research into bioship technology as part of the Council's new xenobiology division. Her work led to the development of new defensive systems that could counter biological weapons, ensuring that the sacrifices made at Kepler 442 would continue to protect galactic civilization. The Zephyrian survivors rebuilt their world with help from across the galaxy, creating a memorial to the crews who had died defending their freedom. The memorial's central feature was a statue of Captain Shun standing beside a Korathan warrior, representing the alliance between humanity and the Deathworld species that had saved their civilization. But perhaps the most important legacy of the battle was the change it brought to galactic culture itself. The assumption that advanced technology and overwhelming numbers guaranteed victory was replaced by a new understanding. Sometimes the outcome of conflict depended not on who had the better weapons, but on who was willing to fight hardest for what they believed in. The phrase, "Remember the Indomitable," became a rallying cry for military units throughout the galaxy, representing the principle that no sacrifice was too great when innocent lives were at stake. Human crews serving aboard alien vessels would often hear their shipmates whisper those words before dangerous missions, a reminder that courage was contagious and heroism could inspire an entire galaxy. And in the archives of the Galactic Council, the official report of the Kepler 442 engagement became required reading for all military officers. The final paragraph, written by Admiral Vextar himself, captured the essence of what had been learned. On the day when every major fleet ignored a desperate cry for help, it took a Deathworld coalition and a single human warship to remind the galaxy what it truly meant to be civilized. They proved that civilization is not measured by the sophistication of our technology or the size of our fleets, but by our willingness to risk everything for those who cannot protect themselves. In honoring their sacrifice, we commit ourselves to ensuring that no cry for help will ever be ignored again. The galaxy had learned that sometimes, when facing the impossible, the answer wasn't to find a better way to fight. Sometimes, the answer was simply to refuse to stop fighting, no matter the odds, no matter the cost, no matter the consequences. It was a lesson that would define galactic civilization for centuries to come, and it all began with a distress call that almost everyone ignored, answered by the few who understood that being truly human, or truly alive, meant fighting for something greater than yourself.